Hello, everyone, and welcome to Axis Group's session on making DataOps work for everyone and everything. Some brief intros here. I'm Chris Johannessen, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Rich Simon. Personally, I've been involved with data and analytics, and I can say streaming data, for over 20 years since my days way back with GE and NBC Universal in the early days of both the Internet of Things and streaming media. And my colleague, Rich, has been consulting around data analytics for 15 years. And we both share a background in bringing data initiatives to life for organizations large and small. Our agenda session today will focus on three key areas: the challenges we face with bringing data ops to life for new stakeholders and very new personas that are a bit different than what everyone has faced in the past. To solve for these challenges, we'll share an approach to data ops that starts with a framework and then drills down into some key areas and focal points to put your organization on the right path. And then we'll start to conclude things and wrap things up a bit with some more ideas, a case study, and takeaways for making data ops work for everyone and everything. And everything includes, in our modern world, bots. And more on that in a little bit. To help us break the ice with you a bit, we've come up with a quote that we think speaks to the spirit and aspirations for data ops. As we see it, data ops is entirely in service of shortening the distance between raw data sources and impactful business outcomes. And as we start to think about outcomes, we think about who we serve to drive those outcomes. So we're going to talk next very briefly about stakeholders in data ops. There are a wide variety of stakeholders you'll have to satisfy as you bring data ops to life, from executive leadership throughout levels of the organization, including security and governance in a world of increasing sensitivity around privacy and the consumption of data. Success brings more success from both the supply side and increasing volumes and variety of data. Recall the 5 V's of big data: volume, velocity, or speed, variety, veracity or accuracy, and of course, the value and the ROI of data. This success also creates elevated expectations from the demand side as well. Demands from increasingly data literate colleagues across your organization who, as they become smarter and more to learn more about how they can use data, of course, want more and more, to the aspirations to convert this data into revenue impacting activities, including automation and AI, to either help increase revenues or reduce operational costs. And to serve these stakeholders, it is helpful to bring in the concept of personas along with some design thinking to help you tame what might appear to be a chaotic cast of persona characters to serve. We can think of these personas as either 4 persona types or just 2. Note the addition here to the traditional people personas of a non-persona, the bots. Bots are data consumers too, like it or not, in a modern world, from basic automations to advanced RPA or robotic process automation and AI, or a blend of both RPA and AI that some call intelligent automation or even augmented intelligence. However we think of them in segments or individually, our data consumer personas all have unique needs that need to be considered and addressed as they tap into data pipelines. The data ops approach to these personas is also a bit different, and thus requires a different way of working. Unlike traditional data and technology ways of working, data ops is a blend of agile data ops and concepts from lean manufacturing, bringing together a new way of working while addressing what might be for your organization a new array of personas. Certainly complicates matters as you're trying to embark or continue along on your data ops journey. New consumers, new demands, and a new way of working that is a bit undefined is certainly a formula for trouble. You may need to address a wide range of concerns, such as upskilling your technology teams to managing the expectations of analysts and leaders, while keeping those bots fed timely, clean data and keeping them from throwing untimely technical or business exceptions or errors. With that, I'll pass to my colleague, Rich.
Thanks, Chris. So what is the promise of data ops? Well, we really like this quote from Ted Friedman at Gartner that really focuses, we think, on the right thing, which is that the development of the data pipelines and these products really become about collaboration and shared understanding of the value proposition. And once you align people behind that one principle, a lot of things start to fall into place. Now, the promise of data ops, as we'll see in a second, is really increasing. And will only get higher, according to Gartner. And I think we all kind of agree. We're here at the DataOps Summit. That is part of the purpose. But its promise is really huge, because once you say that data pipelines and products are about collaborating and achieving value together, you end up with a lot of stuff on the left that can really come out of it, from collaboration, obviously, but data aspirations and having a foundation that's ready and structured for you to step into, so that there's a predictable path to get from the demand need down to the supply. And then there's things like standards and automation, along with building trust in those platforms that are actually delivering what people want and what consumers need to make better business decisions. There's transparency and the ability to scale, and the ability to manage risk, because you have a systematic way of addressing how to proceed with these kinds of data flows. And then finally, you get the items at the bottom about reducing support costs, better quality, and improving efficiency, which we'll also talk about a little bit later. So DataOps, as I mentioned, is rapidly gaining traction. We are here at the DataOps Summit, one of only a few events that is focused on DataOps. And the Google Trends map certainly is showing a general increase. But the item I think to watch for here is that it's moving up the Gartner hype cycle. If you could see the two red dots on the left, it's moved up pretty sharply, but it is way at the left, and there is a long road ahead of us. And that means that DataOps is not quite defined yet as it could be, but there's a lot of room for evolution as we move forward. So Chris is going to talk a lot about how we move forward, but it is time to get busy.
Thank you, Rich. As we mentioned at the outset of our chat today, a best practice to help bring a data initiative to life in the modern era is a framework. This next bit of material, which we admit is a bit dense content-wise, we'll touch on some areas to explore, and then you'll be able to read the materials more closely after we post them, after our time together today. First takeaway here is that our framework for the modern data era is a bit different than the traditional PPT or people process technology frameworks you may have encountered elsewhere. We're sharing here our 4P framework: personas in place of people, process, program so that you can look at everything together and make sure it's running efficiently, and platform. We've touched on personas a bit already. We'll now go into some process considerations focusing on operating models for DataOps, then touch a little bit on how a program consideration, namely maturity model, can help guide your thinking on which operating model to select. We'll then touch a bit on platform, technologies and tools, such as stream sets, before we go into a case study a little bit later on. Now, in our experience, we've seen 4 different blueprints for operating models, as we'll dig into next year. They are a centralized formal model, a decentralized federated model, which you can see everybody's a bit isolated and off in their own space, a hybrid model, a little mix and match of these different models, and a centralized federated model. Depending on where companies are at in their maturity model, typically see them evolving eventually to a centralized federated model. But as we like to say with models, somewhat analogous to an old famous phrase in the space, all models are helpful or something to that extent. We'll go a little bit into each of these models because some models might be good for you and some may not.
I think it's all models are wrong, but some models are useful.
Yes, there we go. So we're going to dive in a little bit here and do a little bit of pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages of the models here so you can get up to speed and think a little bit about these different operating models. Starting with the hybrid model. In a hybrid model, you see a partially centralized team, which is a hub, with some resources and spokes that are specialized. Now, there are some considerations here, such as location or geography, the mission of the focus point, or the criticality. Very advantageous for helping global firms overcome large distances, but they tend to require some more communication versus some of the other models. There's also, you note here, a lack of embedded resources in the BUs or the business units, which can make it hard to scale. Now, compared to this model is another model that we briefly mentioned earlier, the centralized federated model. Here, this is a mix of central shared resources, like a shared services team, which can focus on standards, templates, core cross-organizational needs, And then you have embedded members in each of the business units can help you move rather quickly for execution. An advantage here, you have cross-functional involvement. Another advantage, it enables the business units to remain agile while leveraging the best practices and standards. One of the challenges or disadvantages of this, you certainly require a strong leader, a strong facilitator to make a model like this work. And competing priorities, if not managed properly, can impede collaboration. So there has to be a bit of trade-off and communication to keep things balanced. Moving on to our second pair of models to think about, our centralized formal operating model versus a decentralized and federated model. Now, centralized formal operating model is a single shared services team that manages and handles processes, oversees data ops management, and they deliver platforms for the business units. For a few pros here, you have a single point of accountability, one group within the org chart. Figuring out org chart and political issues can certainly be a chaotic element to team with any of these models, to be honest. And a disadvantage here, it can be a bit rigid because it's all coming from one central standpoint and broadcasting out into the rest of the organization. As a result, you may miss some innovation opportunities with a particular model like this, but it can work in certain different types of industries where you're trying to bring data ops to life. Last but not least is the decentralized or federated model. This is a COE or Center of Excellence model that is independently managed by the business units themselves, and they are centralized and they each have their own organizational chart. So they're able to focus on the BU because they're part of the BU and quickly react to things, highly flexible and agile, but specifically for that BU, which makes it difficult to scale a model such as this. Also, as a result, since everybody's kind of fragmented and off in their own space, best practice sharing or collaboration may be highly impaired unless you have, say, an annual get-together for sharing best practices. And that can, of course, result in some rework and inconsistency across the organization. And with that, I'll turn this back over to my colleague, Rich.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, there are a lot of models out there, and some may take pieces from one or the other. It's very unlikely that you'll have an exact blueprint that we're showing in your organization or where you ought to shoot to. But the important thing is really to look at it in terms of how mature it is and how mature you really need to be. Different businesses will have different needs, different amounts of scale that they need to do, and different velocities to move data around. But the idea that should be remembered is that your timeline for shifting from one model to another really is going to depend on your data ops level of maturity and the specific program factors. So there's a useful maturity model that was propounded by John Schmidt a couple of years ago at this very summit, and there's a book, DataOps, the Authoritative Edition. And it is a useful guide to examine where you ought to be and where you are. So from initial, repeatable, defined, flexible, and innovative. And like a lot of maturity models, it gets to the point by looking on a spectrum at how successful you can be and where those factors of success really lie. So if you look across the top here, you'll see that the thing to notice is that it gets more holistic and more strategic as you go to the right and stays more fragmented and tactical down to the left. But what's important to note is that at any of these stages, you really can achieve a good amount of success, but they're different. A data ops program is not all or nothing. As you go up, the things that evolve are certain things that change as you move forward. One is you have more people that are involved. Second, you have more coordination, particularly in the business unit coordinating with IT and the technical resources together. Third, you get more tight standards, things that are more systematically oriented and that proceed along a defined path. And then fourth, you get more automation. Fifth, you get more scale, speed, and reliability. And again, the more you need that, the more you really ought to go to the right. Otherwise, trying to do it on the left is going to be much harder to do. And then finally, more innovation and more impact. You get to focus on the more emergent strategies to evolve and really not have to worry as much about linearity and respond flexibly to business changes as they come up. As you look at this, though, the idea is that DataOps platform is itself still evolving. And the different personas that we are bringing back here have different considerations that you ought to make when you are considering how to implement DataOps in your own enterprise. So first, the technologists. We're going to be having other sessions at the summit today and tomorrow. They're going to talk about these in detail, but generally, these are the items people think about. The technologists think about scale and velocity, as we've talked about, but of course, orchestration and pipelines and observability, versioning and testing and automation, with a nod, of course, to making sure you keep data governance and lineage in mind. The analysts, you need to keep other things in mind. And we are big fans at Access Group of simplified, abstracted interfaces that allow people to get the decision quality data and analytics that they need without worrying as much about what's underlying that. And that also includes for analysts, being able to share in collaboration spaces and share their questions and their findings and have spaces where they can work together. But also, one of the other things that we focus on a lot at Access Group is about online learning that fosters data literacy and self-service. These can be integrated with governance by education, where you gate content and capabilities, depending on people achieving certain gates and of qualification. For leadership, there's definitely room for low and no code ways to manage engineering workloads that are coming up, and those have to be considered as we evolve, along with where a lot of folks are going now is moving away just from ETL and batch and moving towards streaming data. And if there's anything that really requires a systematic DataOps program, it's the adjustment to streaming data. And then we talked a little bit already about monitoring, continuous improvement, but also focusing on change management and adoption. So how do you know that it's actually succeeding? Well, there are metrics that you can take a look at, and other sessions will be talking about them. But monitoring to focus on adoption is probably the best thing that you can do when you bring up a DataOps program. And finally, we talked about bots. You have to also consider how to make data available to your digital workers. They're only going to get more and more common in the enterprise, and they need a continuous, reliable source of data for them to do the job that they're doing, in addition to having exception handling and reducing downtime by making sure that they can actually work and being able to systematically create new capabilities so when the next time somebody needs a bot comes up, it's ready to go. Chris?
Thank you, Rich. As we wrap up the 4 Ps of our DataOps framework, we've talked about personas, we've talked about process and operating models, we've touched a little bit on program considerations and a maturity model. And now we're wrapping up the 4th P, platform considerations. We're sharing with you a little bit here about a real life example about before and after transformation, showing the agility and enablement benefits for overburdened teams, especially in this example, technologists who may get a lot of requests that pile up in their email box. They get a lot of how-to question requests. They have trouble finding help, even at times. Even the data engineers need to tap someone on the shoulder and get some help. Ways to solve for that. Examples again here, a request management system that helps you organize support processes, on-demand courses, as Rich mentioned, for data literacy and streaming data literacy that can scale to the entire organization, say from Stream Sets 101, for example, to come up with an example to other concepts such as what is data drift. And then mentors and dedicated resources that the data engineer can tap on the shoulder to get some additional help virtually, depending on the platform considerations. We'll now go into a case study to start to bring our conversation to a close.
Thanks, Chris. And this is an interesting case study that we worked with a Fortune 50 medical insurer that you'll have heard of, that really aspired to improve health outcomes by democratizing data access to other players in the healthcare system. You know, you're talking about providers, talking about patients, and of course the health plan and the members. So we helped them develop a multi-cloud and highly available fault-tolerant platform that supported, as we talked about, both real-time data streaming and batch data workloads. But there was a big challenge all around here. I mean, first, they wanted to integrate all of those different users but they needed to take extensive measures to identify, protect, and govern PHI, personal health information, and other private information. And they did so with taking a security first, zero trust posture. That complicated things, right? To take a position so that any code development and deployment and all developers were subject to tight security constraints, and it needed to be included in the considerations. But really, by focusing the needs of the data consumers and taking one use case at a time, we were really able to help them develop a DataOps program and an underlying technology that allowed for near real-time access and bidirectional integration across multiple clouds and a private cloud deployment. Ultimately, we helped them put in continuous education as well. Some tools, as we talked about, were governed by education and were not available. They were gated until users were trained. And finally, we helped them succeed through change management. And this is something that a lot of companies simply don't consider until it's too late, that you have an entirely new way of doing business, entirely new ways of working together. You need to also transform the organization with campaigns, communities, and collaboration, along with checking your adoption and making refinements as you go. And in fact, at this insurer, what they did was they found that they were a little bit too rigid in certain areas and they needed to refine things, and that's expected. But being able to do that with the standards that you set and refining those standards is really key to moving ahead.
To wrap things up today, and thank you, Rich, for joining me and everyone else for joining us today on our conversation. Some takeaways. Taking it back from the top, be aware of your data consumer personas, especially those bots who you have to serve now and in the future. Design a DataOps process and process model that aligns with your culture. Make sure you choose the right operating model to set the stage for success. Draw on maturity models as you mature your DataOps program and help inform the evolution of your process models and other capabilities. Design platform components and capabilities that suit your data consumers across your whole array of personas, especially the executives and the analysts, but of course the developers and these folks here with our icon on the far right here, that bot. Focusing on education, adoption, iteration, and collaboration, as we've shared a couple of times here, certainly have some amazing beneficial impacts of not only increasing process speed and reducing risk and reducing errors, but just also freeing up time so that people can focus, as Rich highlighted, on innovation at that far right of the maturity model. Be sure to measure ROI and collect your stories and celebrate success together. And speaking about being together, stay in touch with us. You can check out our website, follow along with us on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we've got a few hashtags, hashtag analytics enablement and hashtag access group. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, everybody.